Good afternoon and welcome back. Please take your seats. We will now resume our program with a panel called Latin American Experiences, which will bring together representatives from different countries to share initiatives, learnings, and perspectives on the implementation of verifiable credentials in the region. To moderate this panel, we invite Mr. William Niles, from the World Bank. Also, Elmer Ferreira Padilla from Dirección de Gestión por Resultados de Honduras. Mr. Isaac Montilla, Ministry of Innovation and Technology from the Dominican Republic. Mr. Juan Felipe Davia Rodríguez from Dirección de Gobierno Digital, Colombia. And also remotely, we are going to have Julian Belistri from the Secretariat of Innovation, Science, and Technology from Argentina. We'll also have here with us Rolando Catan Bojorquez, National Registry of Persons from Honduras. And remotely, we're going to have Sandra Melda from the Secretariat of Innovation, Science, and Technology from Argentina. We're also going to have Isaías Álvarez Castillo from the Center for Digital Public Infrastructure. Juliana Giles will be the moderator of the session. Good afternoon. It is always difficult to resume activities after lunch, but this is the Spanish-speaking panel. So this is now we're going to speak Spanish. So instead of speaking Portuñol, now I am going to move to Spanish.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us after lunch. It's always more difficult in a way. And honestly, I'm extremely happy to have this participation in the sense of not only, as we saw today and yesterday in the event, we have a need from Brazil that is quite big, but also extend this debate for the rest of Latin America. I believe it's extremely interesting. The European Union has some dialogue due to laws in terms of verifiable credentials, VCs. And from the World Bank, we would like to extend this dialogue. We believe that there are several things taking place already and that we are going to discuss in this panel in terms of making these VCs for all countries from Latin America and the Caribbean. From the World Bank, we would like to promote this. So the idea is to continue promoting and driving forward this in each of the countries. And in terms of the dynamic of this panel, the idea is to have a dialogue as fluid and as fluent as possible. Due to time constraints, we don't have too long. The idea is to make it short. For people that have presentations, we are going to ask you to do it shorter if possible, so we can have time for Q&A and dialogue and questions from the public as well. And with this, I'm going to start. I believe that the speakers are already introduced here, and perhaps we could start with Honduras and ask you a little bit about mainly what has been implemented in your country in terms of VCs, digital credentials, and which issues are you solving right now in Honduras in terms of trying to improve the life of citizens? Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invite. And Honduras is focused right now on trying to automate the services is a term that we like better than digitalization. This was born when we had a manual workflow and we tried to digitalize the workflow so we could make it in an informatic way. Automation is a term that is more in line on doing things in real time under demand and instantly. And to get to the level of service automation, we need a fundamental pillar that is migrating from identifying people to authenticating people. And we, as the institution responsible for the foundational identity, have tried to migrate this mission from the simple fact of identifying to have all the biometrical document possibilities so we can authenticate. And in this general vision, of enabling the different tasks through automation, the need of having both pillars for a safe authentication. Something you have that is at the VC and something you are that is beyond the simple identity to some sort of proof of life and biometrical authentication. As part of this delegation, I see this fundamental part to interoperate or to interact with the public institutions and private institutions, both in place as well as in a digital context, in an environment that we could call Citizens 720, 360 of the face to face cycle and the 360 degrees of the digital cycle. And I have with me also the Minister of the Digital Government that is checking everything of these verifiable credentials receipts. In Honduras, we are an autonomous institution, constitutional, that we have the general civil registry of all the country, as well as identifying the citizens that is being seen at the level of all the citizens is like the project that we have with the World Bank with minors so they can be identified with these digital credentials. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. As Rolando was saying, precisely in Honduras, we are working honestly in a process of starting with this digital transformation. One of the pillars of all this has to do with culture. Recently, yesterday, I was in the cathedral and I was shocked to see that in normal economy on a daily basis on the street, you have electronic mechanisms. So I believe this is something that we would aspire to have all these technologies so we can solve and make easier the life for the citizens. In Honduras, we have a huge focus, for instance, of the government in social topics. So, precisely with the Minister of Social Benefits, we are working on an agreement so this authentication of people can help make transparent the benefits received and ensure that those that are receiving the benefits from the government are actually the people that says they are, and building together with transparency as well. And I believe that the Honduras very soon, and I am thinking about a couple of months, is going to start this process of all people being registered in this national uh, e-wallet. And this is the first step that they can be authenticated, credited, and then after that, be able to manage all these different aspects that they need to do that the state is suffering or other institutions, and that it can be done without a need of another piece of paper, and to make it as agile as possible through the app. Um, the product where we are going to promote this digital transformation beyond an app is a cross platform where all people from Honduras can feel that they can have the government at their hands and their life can be easier. So it's not a luxury, this digital identity, but it's trying to solve the needs of the citizens. Thank you very much, Elber and Rolando. And now we're going to get to our colleagues from Argentina. Sandra, can you hear us well? I think we can't hear her. Can you hear us, Sandra? Your mic is off. We cannot hear you either. I think your mic's off. And there we go. Okay. All right. I was hearing the tests quite well, but now I'm having difficulty hearing you well. But we're going to do our best. We can hear you well now. So if you'd like to start with this presentation, let's start then. Perfect. Go ahead. You have the floor now. Right. Good morning, good afternoon. In the name of the Subsecretary of Innovation, I would like to thank the World Bank, the NIC Brazil team, and the Brazilian authorities for this space. In short, I'm going to tell you about some of the main milestones that we have had in regards to the identification and authentication in Argentina, the characteristics that our country had a couple of years ago, yeah, around 2016, was that we had proliferation of several systems in the national context as well as the private context, and that generated their own ways of authentication, even though we had for several years some official providers that had developed these ways for digital identification. So around 2016, from the national government, we drove forward the creation of this Authentica platform where we basically managed all these systems from the national context as well as the subnational context, and other kinds of organizations could be integrated in the platform, and working with the same protocol, we could make use of these official ways for credentials and accreditation of identity. In the platform was deployed throughout the national territory, and about around 2023, and hand by hand with the team of Red Hat, we started with this platform that was mature and very well deployed, so we could start taking some steps in regards to transborder identification. On top of this, since 2024, we've been working together in everything that has to do with the development of keys with higher strength, uh, more secure. And since 2024, we integrated our platform Autenticar with the platform of remote digital signature that is called firmar in Spanish, signing. In principle, the main challenge we were facing as a country is not in itself the development of stronger passwords, actually working with the different organizations of suppliers and providers of digital identity. We've managed to move forward in this sense. However, we needed to manage so the population or certain groups of the population could make use of these ways of higher levels of strengthening their passwords without being included in the digital services. At the same time, we also had the opportunity of generating some concept test and exploring how we could generate some verifiable credentials from this Authentica platform to this project that we called Authentica 2.0, and the characteristics and the learnings that we managed are going to be mentioned by Julian next. Good afternoon. I believe that you can hear me now, and I'm going to take the floor, as Sandra has said. So we are going to round out the characteristics of Authentica. Nowadays, Authentica is integrated around 290 apps from the national state, provinces, municipalities, which is generating some certain permanent maintenance and payload for the team, workload for the team that with this integration with an identity provider is generating and maintaining and configuring permanently this. And this allows us to process between 11 and 12 million authentications of people per month. This introduction to what Authentica is comes because we are identifying at some point the need of including new technologies of digital identification. And we saw that, as we can see in this presentation, I feel that we are in the central, in the core point between the authentication providers that have their own ways of enrollment of people and different verification of people. And Authentica focuses them and is providing all the different apps that are using them and simple and unified interface so they don't have to do all these one-to-one integrations. Our organization that provides the identities, that is the National Register of People, as it was mentioned before, is the one in charge of handling identity. And then we have some other organizations that have created digital identities, like the Collections Agency, like in Argentina, the Social Security agencies, and some others that we have integrated and standardized in a single and unique integration way that is this identity broker called Authentica. So this is the point at the core where we can think in new ways of identity to start practicing. And that's where we generated this pilot that in 2023, with a certain agreement with the Andean Corporation of Promotion and the Development Latin American Development Bank, we generate this experience of development of some platforms of verifications. And by the end of 2023, we finished with this agreement. During 2024, it was created, was tested. We managed to generate these verifiable credentials. And during 25, 26, we adopted the new versions of the standards like verifiable credentials 2.0, and we added the possibility. So in the wallets where we save these credentials to implement the selective sharing of information. So a person can decide which information to share with a certain requirement of information, be it to authenticate something or to complete data in certain public services. And basically, the steps we are going to take step by step. We are not going to go on the left demonstration because it would take longer, but we need to validate basically the identity of the people through Authenticard so we can make sure that we are providing the information of the person that is actually whom they say they are. Then we generate this credential, we allow the person to download in their wallet, and from there they are using it in the services required without having to go through Authentica again. And that's why we were showing before the amount of integration that we had to handle, because this kind of validation of identity allows us not to keep all these integrations permanently, decentralizing a lot everything that has to do with validation of identity. In the web, in the platform we created, we have only 3 steps where we authenticate the person with one of the identity providers. Each one has the provision of identity defined by how are they recorded and how they are identified. We have the agency of collections and consideration of Argentina. And then once we authenticate the person, we validate these data. Authentica is not managing passwords or data from the user, hence is also a safe spot where we don't have any possibility of a data leakage because there are no data to be leaked. Uh, and once this is validated, we generate this credential in a QR code so it can be read and included in the wallet. And this cannot be scanned because you're not going to be able to scan it. And in the wallet is available so it can be used in different services. The use cases that we have, it would be too long to check each one of them, but we have checked authentications without password, simply showing the credential, entering the platform like government transactions, completing forms with data that are available in these verifiable credentials, and even remote verification, for instance, through WhatsApp or some messaging tool where we have a QR code to scan. We scan it with this wallet, and through the wallet, we send credentials and data that only the person actually wishes to share with this requirement of information. So this is the pilot on its own that we have made. We managed to generate the credentials. And well, as conclusion, we have a couple of questions there and a few things to be defined, like validity time of these credentials. Identity is something dynamical. People change of their ID number, they change name, gender, and so on, and they change personal data even. So all of these verifiable credentials should have validity time and a verification as well as other documents. And this might be the main point here to be ruled there. And so we can make use of these verifiable credentials. This is the case that we have practiced, and honestly, it's been a huge success. Well, extremely interesting seeing concrete examples of implementation, and I believe that we are going to have more questions later. Now we are going to go to Dominican Republic. Isaac, we would like to ask you about what you are doing within the framework of this project as well, and specifically which is the progress that we have in terms of verifiable credentials. Well,
It is an honor to be here with all of you.
for me, it's a great honor in the name of the Ministry of Public Administration of Dominican Republic to have these spaces where we can share good experiences of what we are doing and obviously what we can learn from the other colleagues, the other states. And obviously Brazil, that is obviously a benchmark, basically, not only locally, but also regionally and worldwide of this digital transformation and verifiable credentials. And well, before I introduce a specific product that from Dominican Republic we are working, I would like to leverage a little bit on what our colleagues are working on. And when we talk about digital transformation, that we in Dominican Republic, we as the Ministry of Public Administration is part of our responsibilities, we have to put on the table certain elements. And on the one hand, interoperability is important so all institutions can actually communicate in an efficient way so we can guarantee better processes. On the other hand, capability built both from public servers but also from the people. And on the other hand, also as a very important means and a tool, everything that has to do with verifiable credentials. And we ask why verifiable credentials. And well, our colleagues from Honduras established in an amazing way the difference between digitalization and automation. We are also on top of this boat of automation before, as we saw some practical cases, some processes that could be taking 40, 50 days can be executed in real time. But a important base so we can reach authentication in the right way and in a good way is data clarity. How much data is good? How good is the data? Is verifiable, can be authenticated, and in here, verifiable credentials VCs have a very important role. On the one hand, with validation. On the other hand, authentication, but also clarity in personal data that is useful so we can actually move this towards the main focus that is the citizen, the people. It's actually creating a government for the people in each one of the different life stages of the citizens. And to share a practical case, we from Dominican Republic, together with the World Bank and other colleagues and friends here, we are working on on a single uh, business project. It's a digital wallet for the micro um, and the SMEs and the big companies as well. Okay, more efficient even. With this, we are looking to reduce bureaucracies and the different time taken in different business topics. We want to provide the companies a single identity and promote the competitiveness of the SMEs. And we are facing this issue right now that is common, I believe, in for many of the countries in the region. We have several transactions in the company that are manual, but even worse, that are extremely fragmented. And each institution is asking for the same documentation once and again. And they are developing verification systems once and again. One of the situations of these fragmented systems. And last but not least, validation that is done with physical copies, with PDFs checked by hand. And it might be that they are digital, but when we want to automate and we have these validation systems, it becomes extremely complex. And well, the solution that we are showing is this single business folder. It's a digital folder that is going to provide access on the phone to each one of the representatives of the company's SMEs, where we are going to have available validated documentation ready so they can be shared with consent, warranting less use of paper, less lines, and more safety. How does it work? Three specific steps. Number one, the company is registered, enrolled voluntarily, receives their unique folder in the mobile phone, and they share only what's necessary with a QR code. So then technology that we have behind this is obviously this verifiable credential. We don't have to get too much into detail on the concept of verifiable credentials, but a basic benefit that we're going to have, for instance, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and SMEs, that is the product owner of this project, is providing data to third parties. The power is had by the legal representative of the company. This is a very important element so we can guarantee safety and security. And the benefits are transactions in minutes, almost real time, would previously would take weeks, months, and we can reuse the same folder for different institutions, and the company has full control. The company decides what to share and when to share it. This obviously is going to generate an impact in reduction of costs and bureaucracy, strengthening the trust of the state and the business, and also promoting digital national digital transformation. In the case of initial use that we are promoting is opening a bank accounts. So according to the Bank Association of Dominican Republic, opening a business account takes 20 to 30 days, work days, in the best of the cases. With this folder, that is the unique business folder, we're going to have immediate validation with verifiable documentation, and the impact obviously is visible. SMEs with higher and faster access to financial services, that is one of the main steps for everything that has to do with formalizing and formalization of everything. We have support from institution. This is a project that we are promoting with the support of the World Bank, but also we as the Ministry of Public Administration, as director of everything that has to do with digital transformation, the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, and SMEs, as a product owner of this initiative. And obviously, in detail, there is the Dominican Institute of Telecommunication, the Government Technology and Information Office, that is the operations institution in terms of digital transformation, and also superintendents of banks of the Dominican Republic as key partners in technical boards. Some of the progress that we have had so far. Now, Optic, the government office, has provided all credentials so they can use it in the a unique account. We have had meetings with INGI where we were informed that it allows multi-tenant and recommendations is an installation in every place, and everything that has to do with banks. We recorded all the documents recorded from the banks, and we have worked with the focus groups. And I want to get to this. These are the prototypes of interfaces that we have been developing. We have in here the web desktop, the prototype for desktop, and also prototypes developed for mobile phones. With everything that was recorded, with all the collection of data, with the focus groups identifying which are the needs, which are the obstacles that we were having. Currently, we are working with these two interfaces, and the next step that we are working on is to create pilots with creating bank accounts with the selected focal groups, and then we can establish scalability of this project. What's interesting from all of this is that as we are on top of software reusable blocks, we can start perfectly with a single business folder, and this obviously could be used for other sectors, and we are thinking about expanding to agriculture. We are already working with the Ministry of Agriculture there and other institutions like housing. So they have approached us. So we can, with this verifiable credential, serve them in the most efficient way and safer way our people. Thank you. Thank you very much, Isaac. And now we're going to get to Isaias from Dominican Republic, working in CDPI. I believe it's interesting. If you could please mention what CDPI is and at the same time to tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing at the regional level and how you are supporting this part. Um, okay, thank you very much for this space and this time so we can discuss about what we are doing in CDPI and what we are seeing in Latin America. And and we are going to see a short presentation we have. And as it was mentioned by Julian, I believe the first part and most important part is to say what is it that we're doing or where do we start from CPI so we can talk about our role and the vision we have from as Latin America. And first of all, I'd like to mention that we're working in more than 25 countries in these moments, mainly in three regions: Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Latin America actually is the one that has the most movement lately on our side, and we are not software vendors. We're just supporting countries in their implementation or design of architecture for all kinds of TPIs or how the TPI can escalate. It could be payment, it could be data sharing, it could be identity, and also verifiable credentials. So this is part of this data sharing component. And we also help assess different kinds of technologies that are supporting the different kinds of verifiable credentials, mainly credentials and payments. So we are doing this diagnosis, assessment on all of them. And as we can see in this presentation, we have assessment, for instance, of what things, NG, work ID, what ID, and some other kinds of solutions of credentials of VPIs that we have in the world, but looking from an agnostic point of view. Finally, in LATAM, we have mm, we are present in several countries. We are going to see this more in detail, but we are acting in Peru, in Dominican Republic, Brazil, together with COS, Trinidad and Tobago, Costa Rica, and some other countries that we have been consulting for in different kinds of projects. And what do we see in Latin America from this DPI? We have 6 projects, let's say, that are extremely active right now. First one is in Peru. In Peru, they are working on a digital identity part where we are looking to provide the citizens with a visa of identity that can be used for different projects, authentication, or any use they might have. Peru used to have a couple of years ago a solution for authentication that was extremely mature, but now they are taking these authentication solution to create a verifiable credential. Together with them, they are creating these civil registries, like the birth certificate, uh, marriage certificate, death certificate as part of the documentation. That RENIAL, that is the institution that is being the anchor of everything that we are doing right now in Peru, is going to help the citizens. And also, it's not included there, but I remember the MTC, that is the institution in charge of traffic in Peru, is going to provide the citizens this option, like a driving license, e-driving license in a way of this VC. And it's also mentioned in Peru TPG that is being used, that is NG. And in Brazil, together with CONS also, we were for national identification that was worked with NG in Dominican Republic, as it was mentioned well by Isaac. Soon we are going to work or support in this project of company credentials. In this case, we would start with SMEs because we would be working them with this, and then we would have a project in Dominican Republic about um, verifiable credentials for public servers that is also being worked there. In Trinidad and Tobago, about 2 months ago, we started having in production a verifiable credential for employment, in which through this um, employment options that they have in Trinidad and Tobago, they can apply for some work and they can verify that the titles that have for this employment are valid. Jamaica is also being supported with IDV in the implementation of verifiable credentials, mainly for identity. And in Colombia, it was the last case
Recording in progress.
Son parte importante de qué cosas tienen que tomarse en consideración para que una solución no solamente se quede en una sola área, sino que también pueda escalar a fronteras u otros sectores principalmente. Porque muchas veces pensamos solamente que hay que pensar en otro país, pero muchas veces hay que pensar también en cuáles sectores diferentes puedan comenzar a interactuar. También hemos visto que en algunos países la billetera se convierte como el cuello de botella político y se supone o debe de ser más importante trabajar el trust layer para que la solución pueda escalar. El tiempo va pasando súper rápido, vamos a ver cómo llego a tiempo. Es un numerito bajando.
Respond in the right time. Is the numbers going down and puts a lot of pressure there. How do we work in CDPI? We are working in 5 dimensions. First, supporting the countries, supporting architecture, another one, supporting in technical assessment of implemented solutions in the country and possible solutions that could be used there, providing also in the capabilities and with them, the bootcamp has been a new way to support that we have been working on, but we are also applying a workshop, white papers, and some other techniques and strategies that we are supporting. We are supporting in how to escalate, and the go-to-market of the projects so they can reach the biggest amount of people possible. And obviously, all of these, in regards to credentials, TPIs, have legal topics where we share experience from other countries so we can help you work on some legal frameworks or topics that we need to take. From all the capabilities we have, I'd like to take a minute talking about bootcamps, and these were an idea that we received in an offsite that we had in our main place, that is India, and we designed model a single week so we could have and live the capabilities of verifiable credentials within a country. How do we do it? The first 3 days, this has to do with training the country. We are looking for a way to integrate verifiers, meters, and the possible people that might be interested in use cases in a country. We sit together in a single room as we are here, but with some work tables, and then we started distributing about what are these verifiable credentials, how can we with them open use cases or cases that can help most of the population. We identify together possible use cases. We define these cases. We're going to say that we define the scheme, and then the last couple of days, what we do is some technical work, because as I mentioned, that we work with emitters and verifiers from each institution that is going to become an emitter, or possibly an institution that is going to be a verifier. We have to have technical teams, because the last couple of days, we as a whole together have to define a credential to choose the kind of TBG that we're going to use, implement this, test it, and then in the last day, the most interesting is that we can live in their infrastructure a solution of verifiable credentials that can be taken as a concept test. It can become a pilot depending on how this first stage is taken in a single week. That, in our opinion, it has been very innovative, this DPI, because it usually takes more than 6 months. So what we do in these boot camps is to do this together, but everything is pre-packaged, so it's only defining and deploying. In Colombia, we implemented these rural ideas I mentioned before. Then we're going to live in Dominicana to work next month about this idea from like this business idea. Then we are going to go to Benin in Africa so we can have another project and a couple more that we have on the file that we thought it was very interesting, these results that we had in Colombia. My time's up. I'm not going to talk much because it's what has been talked the most, and we believe from this DPI that is what actually unlocks the potential of VCs if it is interoperability. And I believe that in this case, we as Latin American people, this regional interoperability that we can generate, or that we understand that should be generated from Latin America, we define it in 5 layers, in which we define, for instance, cryptographic infrastructure and architecture. What is the trust framework that we need to define between the different countries or participants, the protocol that they need to use, which are the interfaces, and based on all of this, which are the use cases that can be unlocked interoperable between the different countries. And this is important, obviously, because as I just mentioned something quick, as health record that we have, that we could have here, if we go to another country, we could take these vaccines, for instance, ID that could be interoperable. We are seeing in here that in the countries they are evolving. So, for instance, SD Jones are complying with the de facto standard, so they can implement this. And this is extremely important because these standards help a lot, so we can have interoperability amongst or between two countries. Health, especially in education, is something very important. Raxel next month, apologies, is this one is actually the network of ministries of health of all Latin America has moved forward in an interoperable model of health situations in the region. We have a couple of call to action that we have here, like for instance, each new implementation, we have some things that we understand that should be important, that they should have their commit, the open standards that we should have as much as we have discussed these days. The governance design should have from the beginning. These are some of the things that should be the most important, more than any technology situation. Technology there, and it can be used in terms of governance. These are very important as we are doing and seeing from the different countries. And last but not least, any time that we are thinking about some design for our countries, we should take and think that we should think how this implementation we have in the country should operate or interact with design of other countries. So basically, this is what I had from this DPI. Thank you very much, Isaias. I believe it was very interesting. Time is almost up, and I will need to leave some time for questions from the public in case we have some. But I wanted 1 minute for answering each of the countries. I'm sorry, 1 minute so the different countries can answer. We are having different stages of implementation of this technology, but I believe everyone is moving forward a little. The question, if it could be in 1 minute, is what did you learn? What did you learn of this process of what you are implementing so far? Each one, I loved a lot this Argentinian case with the pilot ongoing, and with verifiable credentials, I believe it's important to learn what each country has learned. So maybe to change a little bit, we could give the floor to the colleagues from Argentina, and if they can answer in 1 minute, and then we can go back here. Yeah, well, the conditions that I mentioned, we saw that it was possible. We see that it helps with the operations of authentication using verifiable credentials due to the decentralization that it means, even the possibility of verifying without internet connection, as we have seen throughout all day yesterday in some other panels. And however, it's still necessary for this validation is focused on the organizations that are officially providing it and verifying it. And on the other hand, another of these conclusions is this one about the validity, how valid it is through time, because there are some that are immutable, as some study certificate and vaccination certificates, but there are some others that can change through time. The next day after having a credential, we can verify the data with the changes that could be requested, or having someone with certain attributes. And this infrastructure is something to be defined and to rule, especially. Normativity now allows us, in our case in Argentina, that we can authenticate any of these transactions or gestion started from the state should be valid if it was previously authenticated with these methods. But even so, we have to support it with normativity, all of this that is being researched and checked. Would you like to add anything else? I believe that's it. I don't know if they can hear you. Okay, Rolando. I believe that our biggest learning is that the chief of public institutions should not only be people, but also the future. When we in 2018 discussed, it was very common to have a chip in our ID. And I believe that we were some of the first countries to have a QR code for validation. And we are the first, and I believe the only national registry where all information is on the cloud. Also on the cloud. We are in the Oracle cloud with legislation, so we can have it and manage it ourselves. And this allows us to think the future for data governance with artificial intelligence, because it's no longer about verification, but it's like this verification that at the end is a parameter that I can get with this. What do I do with this? And how can I get a group of data? And at the end, artificial intelligence is a group of data, a connection of everything with everything, so we can work on this. So I believe that if any message can be left is to have always the future as a chief. Okay, thank you. Isaac, can you hear me? Okay, so some of the learnings I could summarize in three fundamental stages. Number one, the connection is important. This enrollment to see it in the same place, the different stakeholders that have to do with this. Otherwise, it becomes extremely complex to be able to provide a final product for the citizens. And that's why we have provided some efforts with CDPI. For instance, we are going to have next July, as Isaias mentioned, the first boot camp of verifiable credentials that we're going to have in Dominican Republic. And the position with this, with the different stakeholders, we're going to sit in the same place. We're going to create some verifiable credentials, not only for micro and SMEs, but also other productive areas that can be useful, and we can all be included. And two more topics. Number two is change management. It's important for people to understand what this is about and that they can be supported by the wheel. The colleagues from Honduras were discussing that we have a lot of good technical teams, but this also needs some political willingness, but also willingness from the people. And for this, we need to understand what this is. And that's why the third branch is the continuous training. And we understand that these three elements, integration, training, and everything that has to do with connection with the different stakeholders, are basic and primordial teachings to establish projects with these VCs. Isaias, I believe that you talked a lot, but I don't know if you have anything to add. Otherwise, we're going to take this time to mention something else. I'm not country, but I would like to mention quickly as a takeaway that technology is not an issue, what we have seen in the countries. Every day, technology is showing solutions that help with the deployment of verifiable credentials or any other DPI. So technology does not become an issue. What we continue seeing are some topics in regards to the law, mainly trust and the use or adoption. These are some of the things that first we understand that have to be thought about in verifiable credentials, because there are some countries that have this temptation of willing to have 20 verifiable credentials, but these 20 credentials can be used once or twice per year. So many times it's better or it adds more value having two or three VCs that are constantly used and that add a real value for the citizens instead of thinking of creating a lot of verifiable credentials in the country. So basically, these are some of the things that we see and understand that are extremely important. Technology is not, is there, it exists, and each day is going to be used for more for some reasons. We are going from 6 months in implementation to a week, and that is because things are being easier each day. The blocker could be trust and then also adoption, getting verifiers within the countries for these verifiable credentials that we need. Excellent. And taking advantage of the time that we have left to open these two questions, I don't know if there are questions here or from people online. Um, Otherwise, we're going to move on. There is a question over there. Hello, thank you very much. This is Jimena from Colombia. I have a question that I want to ask for Argentina and Dominican Republic, and it has to do with what's the role or like which good practice have you found in the onboarding of these stakeholders? You mentioned in Dominican Republic, Isaac, that they had the Chamber of Commerce as a partner, as an ally. Do you have a decision-making power in a board of work, or in Argentina, the allies that they have in the board have decision-making power? And how are you going to handle these credentials in the future? Trying to understand the governance. This is a great question that you're asking, and that's why, as we are moving forward with these kind of solutions, in two different speeds. We're also working everything that has to do with governance, because one of the challenges that we found when we had the first session of this work of the technical boards was fragmentation. Everyone has decision-making power. The Chamber of Commerce has their role as directives, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce and SMEs, and the Ministry of Public Administration also has it. But when we want to converge in the same board of work, then it's quite complex. That's why we have some stage of identifying the roles, who is the product owner of each one of these solutions, and through this scope that they have as a directive organization and what the law establishes, then we can define or have already defined which are the limits of each one of the stakeholders. Obviously, all of this can be worked in a regulation framework, governance framework that is going to allow us to be more organized and to know where we're going to and how we are going to do it. Julian? Yes, we're going to let people from Argentina answer because I believe this question was for them as well. Yes, and we have worked on certain experiences that we had at the level of the municipalities in the emission of these verifiable credentials, always focused towards some niche, some communities that were interested specifically in this topic. For instance, people that were doing some courses, some trainings of blockchain at a certain point, or and some municipalities that established this as an experience so they could add and as practice as well as final point of these trainings.
So far, the adoption of the credential is from very particular sectors using and knowing about technology. And they wanted to do some experiments, but not for a massive adoption that at least we haven't planned so far, but we've experienced it. So this is going to change by the time. This is going to be more frequent because we have credentials from other kinds. But we're gonna have this need, and this is gonna be a common use. We don't think we're gonna need to boost it, and this is gonna emerge. This is gonna be adopted as any other technology.
we have as a goal to implement verifiable credentials, not only to the identification, but also to civil registry.
Yes. In Honduras, the civil registration and the identification and the system of identification of the nation, those three, it's in which we have VCs. It's an autonomous institution and it's in the constitution. And I can tell you how it's the need of having our first VC. We had the migrations towards US bound migrations, and we have the Homeland Security Department there. And they were telling us they have original paper from their date of birth that was for free and was in all the paper offices with fake data. So they have gangs buying fake original to do some human trafficking of minors. At that time, with the date of birth, with biometrics, and was validated, and we with QR code try to validate only by reading that from the app of the national registration of the person, and we generate this birth certificate. And from there, we're gonna have all the certification, birth certificate, the marriage, and we're gonna verify it immediately. We eliminate those security papers because at the end, all of those are going to be like an exposition for the falsifications. And now we have the digital identity document and the e-wallet. From the physical document, we're going to have the verification possibility with two QR codes, the high range for the verification for the storage QR code and the interoperability verification, which is going to be towards the ID the ID national document. So thank you, Rolando Claudio. We're running over time, but do you have any other question? Well, then no. So with this, I would like to close this panel. So thank you, all of you, for your time, for coming to Brazil, and for really sharing your experience. So I think it's pretty important from the standpoint of the organization of this event. Think about, as you told us at the beginning, being Brazil in a specific case as the verification, the age verification, but at the same time, as a matter of fact, we're gonna have a verification for Latin America. I think it's worth it, and to follow up. And other countries are there, and we need to see matching points in use cases. Brazil with car, Colombia with the rural registration. I think we have an agricultural thing, and we see that it's a very use case. So we need to really encourage and drive it, and especially when our cases we're having the agriculture. So this is an education, but we need to do those working groups. I think that's a very big start. And think about your time. This was very interesting, and thank you.
On behalf of Mr. Julian Ayas, and now please get together for a picture, group picture. Thank you to all panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, next in our today's activities, we are going to have a panel mitigating possible negative social impacts where we are going to reflect about the required challenges to be overcome to have public policies to meet our society needs. And for that, Mr. Xavier from cweb.br and nick.br, he works in web science, artificial intelligence, open standards, and verifiable credentials. He used to be a data scientist at the National Congress. And to join him, Mr. Steibel, who is executive director of ITS-NEW. He's an expert in research in public policies for emergency technologies, and he has worked as a consultant for international agencies, including G20. Mrs. Rafaela Ferreira, who is the coordinator of public policies and researcher at IRIS. She works for public policies in digital technologies and its social and institutional impacts. Mr. Xavier, please, I hand over to you. Okay, thank you. We have already heard about several advantages on verifiable credentials. We have addressed some of the challenges and possible risks. Over this panel, the idea is to reflect upon some additional risks and how can we mitigate some of them. I will hand over to Fabio, and I'd like to ask you what are the possible negative aspects and possible risks that we may see at the verifiable credentials environment, and what can be done. Can I have my presentation, please? Risks sounds as being somewhat negative, but risk means a duty to mitigate or prevent. ECA Digital has introduced not just a solution, but also a problem. We are not ready to have open standards without protecting our children and adolescents, let alone to protect authentications and verifications of children and adolescents. Having said that, thinking about risks, it's our responsibility. I've heard that Estonia has created a robot identity. If you have an AI agent, the state gives to that AI agent a possibility to have an identity and to speak on your behalf, a government to its citizens. Luana from MGI says that during the gov.br, they thought they were talking to a person, but that was an AI agent. So verifiable credentials will be ideal in a world where we have AI agents, a citizen has authorized to behave as if he was playing that role. Similarly, we have another agenda, nationality. Where a certain nationality was allowed to be granted access, whereas other not. And now we have a demand for verifiable credentials to be proved. And setting a parallel to age, there are some questions still to be answered. First, if you are Brazilian, someone will have to testify if Fabio is Brazilian or not. Second, if Fabio is Brazilian, it's up to you to know if the father gave that smartphone to the child. Is also a duty to know if Fabio is Brazilian or it seems to be Brazilian. And third, if I'm still Brazilian, if I'm Brazilian the whole time, if at the end of each session, I will have this type of authorization. This is an example far away from identities, just to let you know that here we are creating an internet access condition. There is a fun sentence in Rio de Janeiro, which works down here in Brasilia. Yesterday we went for lunch. We had a verifiable credentials and we went to lunch. This way of work around, it's okay, and so what? The idea of illegal and so what is that every rule should have an exception. In Rio de Janeiro, a red traffic light means stop. But, and you know, if it's 3 a.m., if I'm being robbed, if there is anything going on, that red traffic light should be regulated in a different way. The acknowledgement of illegal and so what, you acknowledge the norm, but you admit that any rule should have an exception. And this is the danger of verifiable credentials, what the rule will say and what sort of workaround we are going to do to be able to enforce such a policy. Both ECA Digital and the new Internet Civil Framework, they interpret a constitution. You may see they are legal, fine, but ECA Digital and Internet Civil Framework, they have some buts. The Supreme Court, by default, they decide if that is constitutional or not. They get a rule and they create 4 additional ones. And the same applies to the Internet Civil Framework. Can you acknowledge ANPD? Can you get a bit of a bill of a project of fake news? Yes, you can. But that has to do with different democracies. And this author thesis is that we are becoming fragile, not the norms, but institutions, as institutions do not give us back the expected answer. And then someone does something to the opposite side, and there is an imbalance. They do not respect institutions because there is an exception to the norm and they expect the norm to be up to date. And what's the relationship to verifiable credentials? If you have age assurance and citizenship assurance, it's worthwhile understanding which institution has such a mandate and how flexible are we. Are you Brazilian? Do you have a verifiable credentials? You seem to have a credential. You seem to look Brazilian. I mean, so the greater risk that we are running here is to flexibilize the verifiable credentials as a possible solution, which we should have since the very beginning of the internet. That seminar should have taken place a while ago in 1999 when internet was developed. And how about credentials risks? First, access. Second, fragmentation. And here I'm not talking about privacy, neither surveillance, which also represent a risk. And those two were not addressed here yet. And I see them as a priority. Regulation has to do with law. But I like the Fisher theory, which says that regulation is a joint of 4 things. What the law says, the type of market where we are, it is also a matter of what is allowed by the code, how we do it, and how the society behaves. And I agree with the W3C standards. We have to think about architecture and how verifiable credentials should be. That is key to go on. What private or public sectors or other governments are doing, we have to think about markets. How are we creating solutions to the different sectors? Digital identity is quite close, fine. And how about society to children and adolescents? You're going to see the father getting the cell phone and giving to the child. And UK is an example of that. They ban that if they are under 16, and now adolescents, they are getting back to their social media because they learn, they keep learning how to go over that system, and they are able to reach a credential even though they are under authorized age. First risk, access. A bank transfer, a wire transfer in Brazil would cost some amount. I cannot pay for a transfer. We have to cope with a transfer cost, a wire transfer cost, and where I remove your additional pains, and throughout the technology that becomes much cheaper. You no longer have to pay for a wire transfer, and 8% of people they got to the banking system due to PIX. Now bank transactions they are much lower. People no longer have to pay for a bank transaction. Similarly, with the internet, once we introduce a verifiable credential, that it costs more than just turning on your computer that will talk to another one in a network. How about internet access if that cost is higher, if it's affordable to some but not to all? Risk is not just the worst case scenario, but the duties that we have about which public policies could be carried out to change the scenario. Anytime we then talk about verifiable credentials, they have to be just as our peaks, cheap, available, and safe. This is our guidance. If we take any other pathway, such as I'm going to issue an identity, I'm going to print a document, I'm going to give a stamp, that will add costs as the old bank transactions that you had to pay a certain fee. TCP/IP was the main IP that we had, a public infrastructure, which decreased the cost of transfer, entry, innovation, such an interoperability that we reach thanks to some internet standards such as TCP/IP. They are amazing to allow a social impact, which we should have also for verifiable credentials. Interoperability has to be discussed, I agree, but CGI has stated throughout the Decree 25 that Brazil was the country to issue a great volume of spams because the email doors did not have a password. Someone would get your machine as a slavery, sending spams from your computer. And the solution was so simple, exchanging the port 25 to 24. And it took 7 years to make such a switch. During the fragmentation process, institutions are data banks, they are institutions, algorithms, they are institutions. And if we do not take the infrastructure governance ahead, we will be fragmented. I will hire company A, the other one company B, we fragmentate, and then it becomes much more complicated to one size fits all. The public policy is just one. I need that internet and in the digital world will tell me if I am authorized to be there or not. The more centralized, the higher the infrastructure, the easier it will be to everyone. We should see and understand the governors as being a platform, which is exactly the opposite of a service rendered by a government. Participative army is impossible. We cannot do it. An army is what an authority has to deliver as a service. It's okay delivering a service as long as the most efficient solution is not the government as a platform. And a seat is an example of that. The state says, you can have this type of construction here, not over there. And then you get electricity, and over that platform, we have new cities, and those cities are replicated. A way to verify credentials is considering a government as a platform. The IRS is an example which I like, and exactly an example of what you should not do. If the state has the obligation to have a last mile app throughout which you are going to solve a problem that is going to take so long to become an innovation. It took so long to be able to fill out our annual IRS through the smartphone. That is not the easiest one, neither the fastest one. And governments, they just need our data. They don't need that number of unnecessary screens. This last mile is not necessary as a service, but rather platforms like telling us which sort of data with which level of quality. If we had that, we would have an app that would work for people with special needs, another one working on motivation, and so on and so forth.
It is great to have GovBR providing a service. It may be required, especially for inclusion. This is like the postal office. Of course, it's important to have the postal services, but if it's just the postal services, then it's not very efficient. And it's not should not be the state just mandating that to be followed. Because just saying that, oh, the legislation should be followed and just by mandate, then we we're going to try to bypass the system because we'll need to solve a problem. So the state should not be the inspector, should not be the law enforcement aspect of that. It could be CGI or maybe a network of players, but the state should help in this process. Try to apply some sort of zoning scheme, and the state should not be inert, should be very active. And this is what I see as the main needs of the internet access. And I see that there's no other scenario where the increase of verifiable credentials is bad compared to the status quo. Every scenario I can think of are better if we have this technology in place. But how to do that is something we need to discuss in forums like this. Thank you, Fabro. I think that we could make this connection with standards to avoid, for example, a fragmentation, and also to adopt verification process that will reduce friction. Now I'll turn over to Rafaela Ferreira, who is going to present other aspects she believes to be important. Hello. Thank you, Enrique, for trusting our group, for inviting us, and thank you to our audience. Well, we should remember the political scenario that led us to this point. Digital ECA is the result of a very intense political mobilization that, in that particular scenario, found some required elements to allow a law of this magnitude to be approved. But there was, even before that, a social pressure to regulate platforms, and its historical landmark is PL 2630, that used to be called the fake news bill, but also imposed other aspects related to freedom of expression, transparency, and responsibility on the internet. When that bill was approved and turned into a law, civil society associations became frustrated because they realized that there were evidences that showed asymmetries vis-a-vis the digital platform providers. And in that scenario, there was a window of opportunity with digital influencer Felka, who made that discussion more popular. And that discussion was mature enough at that point to leverage the approval of that bill. which was turned into the digital echo. So, for us to understand that when we think about the four dimensions, so law, market, social norms, and architecture, we should also foresee how can we move aspects like this towards digital transformation that will be concerned with people's wishes and it will reduce political asymmetries and promote equity. Just reacting to Fabio's talk, I would like to invite you to reflect on something. I'm moving away from my presentation because I think that we should have a free conversation. It will be more productive like this. So going beyond just putting pressure on the institutions, on authorities, so that these technologies can be developed, we should, well, we also have other concerns. So I agree with Fabro. Cost is a problem. Access is a problem if it is not insured. And also, fragmentation is another problem. Today, not considering technology, but considering the regulations, we face this regulatory barrier from a legal perspective. So when we explain people which standards to resort to, there are also problems there. So we should have those discussions, including technical discussions, considering um, these social, legal, and regulatory perspectives. We should also consider the current political scenario of generalized distrust in public institutions. Unfortunately, right now, for several times in podcasts, on the radio, on the news, we hear about how the public machine can move itself so that it can commit to market focused projects. Because of that, the population moves away from the government and from those discussions. And when we discuss verifiable credentials, for example, we first should be concerned on how can we show the population that they shouldn't move away from that discussion. How can we simplify those concepts and explain to the lay people? Some people, sometimes they are experts, but not on that aspect. Sometimes they're experts in just surviving. So how can we explain those people the purpose of that technology? When I was preparing to join you today, I was thinking about those concerns. Sometimes we don't think about those aspects because sometimes people are concerned with a digital sovereignty or an abusive surveillance. I am trying to move away from some words. But anyway, I believe that this digital sovereignty has become shy because it's being threatened by uh, problems in national sovereignty as a whole, as we see in the news. So also news about a clear interference on Brazilian policies by the United States and also on other countries. So, given this broader political scenario that should be taken into account, although we are working with technical issues, verifiable credentials are specifically special. It should be addressed considering this scenario. So, how can we understand this major political scenario and consider next steps. So I foresee crucial risks in, and I would like all of you to be aware of that. You might not agree with me, but at least reflect on those topics. Reflect on massive surveillance, sovereignty, and even aspects that are going to reinforce colonial, imperialistic thinking, and also a need to reinforce digital sovereignty by developing infrastructures that will allow us not to depend on the infrastructure developed in other countries, such as the United States. So these are the points that I have reflected upon to share with you. I know that those are several points, and but those were the concerns I had in mind when I was preparing for this meeting. Oftentimes, when you're here in a room with our conditioning, sitting on comfortable chairs in this beautiful environment, we might forget that what we discuss here will have a direct impact on people's lives. Nick.br and also the CWeb in general have CGI have worked so well to democratize these discussions and translate those terms into easier to understand concepts. But before Nick and CGI, and even beyond the work on civil society organizations that, despite the lack of resources, still bring those topics to the table. So in addition to all of that, to all these institutions that try to work on this, I would like to call upon all of you. When you think about verifiable credentials, think about a digital transformation that will benefit people. Thank you, Rafaela. You talked about surveillance. We know that data collection, mass data collection can be used for surveillance and analysis of behavior of people. And sovereignty, as you mentioned, relates to that, such as the example of United States actions and criticism to PICs in Brazil. Claude Act also has to do with sovereignty. The government from the United States can request data from North American companies, even if they are hosted elsewhere. So that's the Cloud Act. Any questions from the audience in the room or online? Hello, Fabro and Rafaela. Could you talk about organized crime? I think we have a concrete problem with organized crime that is taking over digital infrastructures, and several NGOs have already denounced how the organized crime has a copy of the Cortex, which analyzes vehicle plates, and that should be owned just by the Ministry of Justice. Also, the organized crime sells database from Telegram very openly, issued different IDs, and people who are victims of fraud, even using the GovBR platform. It happened in my family, a federal servant that was the victim of an invasion and access to GovBR. The person was able to to have an ID, a driver's license, then open a bank account, and then got a loan and try to um, have a fraud. It happened with a victim was a member, a family member. So that's what happens. Organized crime can use technology to have access to possibilities of crime. So how can we mitigate the appropriation of technology by organized crime organizations? I would like to take another question from the audience before we answer. Okay, so let's answer that. Yes, I've seen that happen. My father's over 70 and he had his cell phone hacked. And that became a never ending lawsuit, a major headache for the family. So he is an old man who finds it difficult to understand how to deal with a smartphone. And because of social engineering, he ended up clicking on an APK file that allowed his smartphone to be hacked, creating a major headache to all of us. So when I think about concrete possibilities so that we could provide additional protection to citizens, both in terms of the technology, software or computer engineering, something that could allow checking in a more secure way if that person who's doing that transaction is actually the holder of that account, or maybe because I studied law, I keep thinking about maybe banks, maybe platforms. Sometimes they make make problem solving more difficult because of lack of willingness in with good customer service, and even to train their own employees so that they can welcome the person who's going through those tough times and find it very difficult to understand technology and become even more vulnerable. I have been through several situations like that with my father, and I realized I was able to witness how he was mistreated. And that changed when I took over and said, I'm a lawyer and you need to answer because of this or that. And then people changed their behavior. So overall, when I think about verifiable credentials in the Coalition of Rights Network, we think a lot about that. Rafael Zanata is part of that too. When we think about solutions to check age checking for digital ECA, we should take into account the situation of families that just have one smartphone. How can we deal with that? Those are real life situations. So, in terms of technology, how can you deal with that? I don't have an answer to that. I don't have a solution to that. I wish I had, but I think that if there was a silver bullet, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But I am sure that this solution involves these discussions as well. So, Rafaela, I have two suggestions, and both of them have to do some sort of gossip. First, we need to have a system where verifiable credentials can be denounced as non reliable. That is true for PICs. Accounts involved in fraud, a system allows like 5 times before allowing a wire transfer if that account is not to be trusted. So there are several players that could count on gossip, so to speak. And this system allows that because it will create another layer. A second point that has to do with gossip is an app by the government called Safe Cell Phone. It's like you tell that something happened to your cell phone, and then that system will tell all banks that that cell phone was robbed. So fraud could fraud for anything, for loans, for money, for loyalty programs. So in all of that, they should feel suspicious if depending on how they work with verifiable credentials. So if we have a robust governance and good public interest, we could use this control structure to increase people's security. And those who are the most vulnerable ones will benefit from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a question here from the web, from YouTube. As to authentication to meet all the requests by ECA Digital Age Assurance, when would that represent a privacy invasion? I think the most straightforward answer would be technology use or technologies which are based on biometric features, and they store such data, and such data could be used for other purpose. That is a way of violating data. That is data protection violation. We pretended that we have to ensure or verify that age. That is just a way to collect data and to fulfill that business model that uses data to add a value in a way that is a way to violate LGPD and many other principles such as accuracy, proportionality, of the minimum possible collections to reach our main purpose. That would be my 2 cents. To this audience, an audience of experts, I understand that you agree that authenticate something is better than proving something. I want to know if you are over 18 to be able to drink. So authentication is always the best option. If you eventually would have to identify, then you have to be more strict on it. An ideal system is that computer is a computer with lobotomy. It talks to you and forgot that conversation for good, but that does not apply to smartphones or internet. There are ways why you have to hold some information. That is the principle of LGPD, if that is well applied under the proper code and rules. But there is no magics. This is a data market. So as verifiable credentials, the best code has to be designed to be as productive as possible. Any other questions? Thank you for the panel and your talks. Fabro, if I got right in your presentation, you showed a number of possible risks on verifiable credentials, and you closed by concluding that a possible way to mitigate such risks would be having the government as a platform. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What do you get? What do you see? What's your take on a government as a platform, and at what extent a government as a platform would be ideal for verifiable credentials? On an earlier session, Guilherme even made a comment saying that the friends associations of whatever, they want to implement something to their members, and the government not necessarily should be the platform for something which is more regular. like the marble balls, if you were dealing with the manufacturer of marble balls. That's why I ask you if, the government as a platform, but until a certain extent and not as a whole. I became a lawyer during the pandemic, and I said, what for? I paid 1,000 BRLs for the Bar Association credentials. And I said, it would be nice if that Bar Association certificate would be related to the gov.br platform, a way to use that identity for other several things. Nurses, anytime that someone signs as a nurse is a different person because they are not interoperable. If I get the nursing committee and MGI, well, I acknowledge if it works like that, it will work, which is different from the Marble Ball Club. They may say, I do not accept those rules. I don't have encryption. I don't have governance system. Take me out of that. Once the central bank deals with financial transactions or the CVM, those are markets to which to participate you have to fulfill minimum requirements. And that is where a government as a platform would be a good idea, but not government as a state. That is part of the public interest. And neither it means that the government would like to have it, but the ecosystem needs it and would agree with that. A government with a platform would be a way of getting into the topic to establish what is supposed to be minimum boundaries. It's kind of similar to the web, similar to the DNS and the internet. Well, based on those rules, you may, get in trouble, but that's up to you. Okay. Unless there are no more questions, we are going to close this panel. Once again, thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you. We'd like to thank the participants for their contributions and the insights sharing during this session. And now, please, let's take a picture. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for coffee, and please be back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Next, we are gonna go to our next panel of this session, which will address other examples of concrete applications of verifiable credentials. And that will be an opportunity to learn about initiatives currently in development, practical challenges, and experiences related to the adoption of these solutions. And to moderate this panel, we would like to invite Mrs. Yazadora Cordova from DataPrev. She is a Deputy Director of Data Protection and Cybersecurity at DataPrev. She leads initiatives on privacy, security, and verifiable credentials applied to Brazil's public digital infrastructure. And also to participate in the session, we would like to invite Mrs. Andresa Lona from CPQD, Solutions Manager at the same institution where she leads research and development teams in blockchain, verifiable credentials, digital identity, and new trust models with a focus on the practical application of these technologies. Mr. Guedes, General Coordinator of Coordination for the Directory of the Rural Environmental Registry at the Ministry of Management and Innovation in Public Services, and he has served as president of INCRA. Mr. Emerson Ribeiro de Mello, full professor at the Federal Institute of Santa Catarina and coordinator of a technical committee on identity management. He works in the areas of information security, identity management, and access control. Mr. John Martina, professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, who develops projects in the areas of applied cryptography, blockchain, digital identity, and trust infrastructure, including initiatives related to electronic documents and interoperability. And Mr. Marcelo Quiroz, Director of Innovation and Fraud Prevention Projects at Serasa Experience. He has over 20 years of experience in technology, authentication, and fraud prevention, with a distinguished track record in developing solutions for digital trust. Mrs. Yazodara, you have the floor. Hello, good afternoon. It's an honor to be this panel's moderator with so many distinguished experts. I'm sure it's going to be a very fruitful session. All our panelists came to address other use cases for verifiable credentials. I'll have some myself, but I'll let our speakers talk first. We are going to have each one's presentations, and then we will have a discussion panel with Q&A. Professor Carlos, please. Now we have a professor's presentation on screen. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'm here representing a number of people here in our audience today. Together with the Rural Registry related to MIG, Digital Governance Secretary, and DataPrev. Most of us had the chance to be at this concrete case where verifiable credentials were applied in order to improve Brazilian rural credits. Our challenge is to apply verifiable credentials and the Brazilian rural credit. With that, we had first to learn more about Brazilian rural families thanks to a partnership with Digital Government and DataPrev and Meu Imóvel Rural. This is an app that was raised to improve a producer's life with all that bunch of documentations that producers, they have to prove that they work in the rural area. They have a number of certificates, registries, family crops, and those family members to which would introduce the credentials, they would also be introduced for the first time to this app, My Rural Business. And that was just possible thanks to a pilot project which we started developing with 100 families in the south of the country, thanks to a joint agreement with the National Agency of Rural Access. We also had Mater from the Rio Grande do Sul to help me, and also the partnership from the Brazilian bank. We send a credit proposal to farmers via a bank platform. The bank gets the proposal and asks farmer to get the documentation, and based on my rural business, they will send the documentation back to the bank, what used to be done manually before. Those that are aware of rural credits, you know what I mean. We have a pics of documents which we send to speed up the credit operation. We had a project including 100 cases which became feasible from a farmer who requested such a credit. They had some pre-requirements to turn that operation feasible. And I would like to share under which scenario we had applied that initiative at Rio Grande do Sul after that huge draft that we had in the state of Rio Grande do Sul a couple of years ago. And thanks to an agreement with MDA, we visited the most achieved area by the rural farmers, which was that area that you see in blue. Together with this office, Ematar, we are trying to help with the rural registry of 1,000 families that were severely affected. And with that in mind, we developed a pilot project of rural credit access via verifiable credentials, because they lost their documentations. They are no longer able to prove that they are farmers. During that process, we interviewed a smaller number of farmers to understand the use of that rural tool that would help them to be granted the rural credits. We then created a control group, sort of speaking. This is a group that, despite all these issues, all the drafts that they went through, they come from a region with credit access and some access to technical standards. And we now still have some challenges to face. 100% of families interviewed, they were beneficiaries of PRONAF, and they had some prior loan access or credit access by Brazilian bank, and they also had the support from the Ministry of Agrarian Development, MDA. Connectivity is key, and families, they said they would have access to internet, but that does not apply to all farmers, to all families. According to 2022 demographics, 42% of small farmers, they do not get 4G connections. And the rest of them, they have a really low bandwidth in terms of 4G connectivity. And these are the obstacles that we have to face to be able to deploy our project. Technically, support is not a national reality. And then you're going to understand what's the role of technical support to help them to reach a credential. Credit access, technical care, and connectivity, they are all challenges to expand the tool, but we are quite enthusiastic about its implementation, because although we have challenges, that activity has a great reach, and we see it's possible to take those opportunities to a number of farmers. The conventional credit access journey is indeed an issue. On average, a family will take 73 days to reach their credits by collecting all the documentations to submit the project and all the meetings that a financial agent has to comply with. And that is a culture which is already into credit, let alone those who do not have a family agriculture registry. There are around 1 million farmers that do not appear in the history of rural credits. That reveals a number of limits and boundaries to be overcome. We asked a number of questions about the app itself. And 3/4 of those interviewed, they said that was quite easy to access that registry via gov.br. They would find some issues, but after they succeeded, they were able to understand the idea of this tool, My Rural Property, where they would find all the necessary documentations. We also testify the agility, cost reductions that was much more comfortable to farmers. They didn't have to commute to town to get a document. With that, they would save time and costs, and they would have more time left to look after their crops. Digital inclusion challenges, they are many, and you all know that there is a certain age level in the rural area. This is a census from 2017, and we still see the same trend as farmers. They have a low literacy level, and they need their children or grandchildren's help to be able to access all these automated apps. And if we include rural property, that is still a barrier, because not all families will manage their lands. We verified that credentials are able to mitigate transactional costs. they will demand a different type of strategy according to the different sectors in the agriculture. And we believe that a sector with technical coverage and also a support from the rural unions, they will have easier access to credit allowance. And now we have some operations with the bank in the Northeast region. And our goal is to take verifiable credential solutions to that region as well. And our recommendation is to expand the solution and to adapt that to MIR, to advance into interoperability. Today, we have just introduced a new solution in MIR, where we investigate all the components regarding social and environmental and weather conditions, and farmer will be able to follow that checklist free of charge. And to conclude and wrap up, we foresee a working agenda which will include enhancement of MIR and verification of the credentials. By verified credentials, we also think about trust. The two ends, or both ends, they have to know what they are issuing and what they are getting back. But in Brazil, there is an additional challenge, which is to connect that difficult relationship between the subject and the share of the property. And if we have the same type of registry, we see is still a challenge to be surpassed that will tackle on data integration, interoperability, and finally to dialogue with our partners to be able to expand the projects. That is our experience so far, and we are pretty sure that we will be able to make a big change in the rural credit, where we are going to strengthen farmers' quality of life and business throughout verifiable credentials. Thank you, Professor. That is an amazing project. And it proves the importance of different cases that will end up benefiting from the credentials. Professor Emerson, I hand over to you. We'd like to hear your comments on the education sector in the academia. First of all, I'd like to thank Nick.br for the kind invitation. I conducted a research last year with a working group addressing verifiable credentials. My goal here is to show you how those verifiable credentials may be applied in the academia. I am here as a professor from the University of Santa Catarina, and I'm also coordinator of the technical committee at RNP. At RNP, we address a number of issues such as access control in a research manner, and that may become a service to be offered later on to their users. Let me start by explaining how an academic federation works, not just in Brazil, but abroad as well. An academic federation aims to allow that with my access credentials, login and password, I'll be able to access services from other universities as long as they are part of the federations. And that is done based on trust. And to get to the federation, you have to be granted by the managers of the federations. And once you are accepted, all other institutions will rely on those new entities offering services to users who are part of the federations. On a federative model, the committee trusts all the activities which were approved by any other organization or academy which is part of their communities. And being part of the federation means that by rendering authorizations to your users, you are going to also render a number of standardized attributes, and which means in this federation you have to say if that user is a teacher or a student. I mean, a number of questions to be answered are mandatory and others are just recommended. My institution should offer indicators to another one, which will then make their basic control. CAFE means a federative academic community with over 300 participant institutions. And that is communities part of a confederation where users of Brazilian institutes, they are able to access institutes all over the globe. In Brazil, our federation runs through RNP, the National Research Network. And we have a service steering committee which is responsible for the execution of the services. We also have a technical management committee to align our local best practices to those internationally. And we also have a governance throughout a consultant committee with the representatives from the main institutions who are RNP users. What's next with this new model of digital identity? Before, now we go through a decentralized digital model, and all universities, the whole academy is interested in this new model. An identity provider would participate to a process together with any users that will be accessing a certain services to guarantee privacy. Now, verify the credentials with wallets to each one of their users, and the prior model no longer applies. How can we apply that decentralized model, IDD, and still allocate trust where we can guarantee that that credential comes from academic, which is part of our scope? With that, we are going to raise trust and enhance also the technological base. Verifiable credentials, they may be used as an extra authentication factor. Yes, before would have some sort of attrition, but so far they are used for authorization purpose. If you have to access a lab, age, PC, or others. This IDD model, users, they become autonomous even for something which they have not requested. We allow power, but we have to concern if that has been requested or not by that users. Someone gets a liability to hold on something that he didn't hold before, and if they don't do that properly, that person will have their access denied to a number of services. In terms of technology, what changes? In the IDD academic federations, they are supported by a protocol which exists for over 20 years, but with some issues with the modern technologies.
On the other hand, this protocol can be very helpful for the DI, but it would not be so scalable for federations. Now, with the federation, it's more interesting with OpenID Federation especially. This is being used in Europe. There is the RNP where there is a working group. And why do I say that? It's the OpenID Federation is the trust layer that we needed to use verifiable credentials in this new model that we're using in the academia. Last year, I worked on a project, and the result of that and the proof of concept is here on the slide. We would issue the credentials, and its records will be based on blockchain. With the OpenID Federation in the academia, let's say the Brazilian academia, we wouldn't need to use blockchain. We wouldn't depend on that. In OpenID Federation, we could use an MAC would be the anchor of trust, and it would issue the type of credential, the information with the type of credential that it can issue. So this institute can issue a diploma or maybe a list of disciplines. So that allows different models, including cross-sectional models for trust. And we have the trust framework necessary that otherwise would be provided by a blockchain. So it needs to have an issue ID, and we can solve that using DNS. So we think about a long-term credential, such as diploma. Suppose that university ceases existing. So we need to design a solution. Maybe MAC can sign this credential together, like in a joint signature. So if this university closes, then it is something that confirms the validity of credentials. So we are able to work around some of the difficulties, work around the need of using blockchain. So we can have an IDD or DDI solution, decentralized digital identity model, that can be used for diplomas as well. And with those trust marks, we can determine who can issue those documents. RNP also has other initiatives related to decentralized digital identity. We completed one IDD model related to the Iliada project, which is about trust. There were 13 working groups, and at least 4 of them focused on DDI. So you see that a lot of research was invested in this area. There are also some working groups in advanced projects. There was one working group that is moving to its second year of work. It's approved to migrate the technology base of the Academic Federation in Brazil to now use OpenID Federation. That is aligned with the project that has just been completed by Janine in Europe that combines 43 academic institutions. So now I'll turn over to the next speaker. That's very good. Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. Now we will turn over to researcher of UFSC, the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Professor Jean Martina. He is going to talk about the data traceability system for the upper education system. I would like to start by thanking for this invitation. I've been working in the past year with 2 concepts that are very similar to verifiable credentials. So one of them is management of identity, especially qualified identity, and also electronic documents. When we talk about verifiable credentials, people think about a new technology, but I see that as a combination of 2 areas that have historically been very similar. We have a project today. I've been working for 13 years on how to convert education into a digital working system. And now we realize that now that we finally organized everything, we are going to turn this model into a verifiable credential model. Well, part of my slide is not being properly shown apparently, so I apologize for the layout. Education as a whole in the world usually counts on technology that dates back to the 1500s. We use paper, we have books, paper books, we record everything on paper, and we issue paper documents. But now on the 21st century, there is this digital revolution, and now we're going through this transformation. I remember that many years ago, I was the tutor of a master's thesis that we decided to build the cherry for a future cake to turn to make digital diplomas. So it became public policy. In 2018, it became a regulation from the Ministry of Education. Today, it is mandatory to provide digital diplomas. So we took educational data and we organized that, is structured in a way that it will be a digitally signed document with all legal requirements and legal guarantees. And now we will launch with the Ministry of Education a project that will be launched by November, and also DataPrev is supporting us to establish a traceability network. So we will work not just with the individual documents that are distributed to consumers, but also focus on traceability. So we would like in the future to produce verifiable credentials from this traceability network. In the past 2 days, people talked about verifiable credentials as a document, but I think it's important to differentiate those long-term documents from something else because documents should remain forever. They should be stored. There are many aspects that are not being discussed here. And when we work with credentials, they'll always be ephemeral. So we need to go back to the source of truth, which is probably going to be a document or a database, and then we will generate credentials that are valid for that particular moment in time. In Europe, they are discussing verifiable credentials, but we also have a quantum event that is about to take place. So anything signed with CDSA will no longer be used and QR code will not work. So there will be a lot of things that will need to be changed. And this technology will go through a lot of transformation. So I don't think these documents will be long lasting. I believe they will be short lived, they'll be ephemeral. We work with the Ministry of Education from 2016 until 2022 to organize data and produce documents in Brazil in a standardized way. Once we started working on this model, we realized that we cannot just produce documents. We need to have traceability of those documents and look for the source of truth. So when credential, when it's going around in society, it could have some privacy features, maybe data control release of data. But documents important to tell about the history of society and how it relates with what happened in the past. One of the risks I see in this process is that if we move everything to verifiable credentials today, we'll be distributing these documents, and in 200 years' time, a historian will look back and will see a blackout in history because there will be no documents to tell the history of that period. It's important to make sure that those solutions are not short-lived. Another characteristic is to work only with database because we want history to be preserved. So we need to understand those document models because things change. Credentials might look one way today, but maybe in the future be different. So a student, for example, he enrolls in a course, then he becomes a student, then he takes different disciplines. So credentials will be replaced and updated. And at some point, you need to revoke his credentials when he, for example, graduates. So if we just look at credentials, this will be used for a person's wallet, but it's not going to be traceable. So the traceability network project will establish the traceability so that we know where the source of truth is. That's where we need trust. That's another important point. And verifiable credentials do not produce trust. Verifiable credentials present trust, but trust was created somewhere else. I would also like to make a connection with what Emerson said. Verifiable credentials do not require blockchain. A lot of people talk about having blockchain behind everything, but then we're having two layers of complexity and interoperability. So verifiable credentials are already difficult to operate. If you added a layer of blockchain to that, then you make interoperability even more complicated. You can, although it's the same distribution, you might be using different languages and different standards. So we are building this network. We understand we need to trace information and we need to know where the source of truth is. So verifiable credentials are the natural way out of it to make this more usable. I would also like to talk about digital signature. A lot of people reduce the trust problem to the signature issue. And although I work with documents with digital identity and digital signature for quite some time, there's no way out of doing that without strong, reliable digital signatures with all the encryption that is behind it. But that alone is not enough because signatures will not necessarily say where is the trust relationship. So we will need to focus on context, on authority. So as it said, so where is this born? How can you determine who is a teaching institution in Brazil? So how can you tell that a person is a student in Brazil, for example? Well, the first answer people say is that, oh, they're enrolled in a teaching institution. But you'll see that it is not a teaching institution. It's a class group because that's being a student. It's not about where they're enrolled. So there are several concepts to be addressed. So authority and context are important. So that class authority is how they got in. But to test their ability is the teaching institution that is going to provide. There are so many nuances involved. I believe that this is a complex process. We will need to determine the legitimate issuer, the academic context, whether there's regulation behind it. So credentials are a transformation of one document into another document. Now, specifically about education. I understand we are going to address several topics, such as the rural registry case. It's focused on that particular example on property. But in terms of education, we will need interoperability from day one. We cannot say, I am going to do verifiable credentials in education and look into interoperability later, because students go round. So I could go to Emerson's institution and I can work on a Wi-Fi using EduRoom. I can go to Germany and also navigate on EduRoom. And also education We'll work with employers, governments, even credit. So wherever people circulate, those credentials will have to circulate too. Uruguay adopted a digital diploma system based on the Brazilian system. Paraguay is doing the same. So I believe in the future we are going to have discussions in the South Cone, and I am sure we are going to standardize education credentials within this network, this block, to do with other blocks, economic blocks later, maybe even reaching the whole world. We see some standards coming up. I would also like to talk about digital sovereignty. This was mentioned several times here. Digital sovereignty is not about technical isolation, but at the same time, we should understand that standards are not neutral. People say, oh, I'm going to use open source. Okay, but our work in PKI and electronic documents show that it's not about the fact that it's an open code. If you cannot talk to someone who writes open codes and propose a different code, you become a slave of that particular standard. We have made suggestions in the PDF standard, and we made changes to it because we have the GovBR platform where we issue 500 million PDF documents. So we had a say. And to wrap up, because I'm running out of time, I would like to talk to you about credentials and to give you some final messages. We see a lot of opportunities, a lot of possibilities, but I ask myself, when will verifiable credentials will no longer be a promise, but something implemented on our day-to-day? I think that once we have institutional legitimacy, so those who can actually issue that will be able to do it. When we will actually have interoperability and can clearly use that, and when there's clear governance. So if I issue an education credential and that is going to be used to play Roblox, I don't know, something unexpected, that's true interoperability. And also a clear governance is crucial, and who will determine those rules. So those are my take-home messages. So verifiable credentials do not produce trust, but we are only be able to implement them once we have answers to these questions. And institutions are crucial for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation and your take on that. Next, we have Marcelo with a market perspective, and he's representing Serasa. Good afternoon, everyone. We had two very enriching days addressing standards, capacity, and anything that verifiable credentials are doing lately. I feel really honored to be participate here with this group of experts. When will that become practical if we have credentials? And I may say that this is already happening in Brazil. But before that, let me put everything to a context. Serasa Experience came to this private sector to solve a problem, and the main one that we see as to identity authentication is something from users' side that have to authenticate and do a number of authentications, and on the other hand, verifiers that have to validate a certain company or person to validate a certain services. And let me highlight that with the efforts of digitalization after the COVID-19, especially within the Brazilian scenario, with a very strong digitalizations of those who didn't have maturity, we have a number of frauds. All digitalizations, they include that issue of identifications. How about trends? Pics. It's very popular in its use. And we also talked about artificial intelligence with AI agents that have to be authenticated, such as Know Your Agent. And also AI will impact the ability of providers and hackers to be able to self-identify yourselves within those lines that will be scalable. In that scalable view, we have some issues, dichotomy, such as dichotomy to urgency and needs. All users on digital platforms nowadays, they ask for velocity and conversely privacy and experience. And we have really high figures according to this research. Similarly, as clients, they care about safety. They are also concerned about personalizations. Therefore, there is a need to understand both worlds. In addition, let me highlight that with experience versus safety or security and the concept of digital identity and verifiable credentials, after we participated since the very beginning of those endeavors, where we see the need to expand that to other models. Digital identity. We have amazing experiences already implemented in this country, and gov.br is an experience of digital identity that is very effective and is part of our routine. And even our federal government was awarded for our level of digital identity. How about the private sector? There are some applications. At Serasa, we have the so-called Serasa Pass, but that's not the only one. There are many other implementations that we can think as part of the concept of digital identity, such as the case of credit cards, such as Visa and MasterCard. We have to understand that digital identity is part of an ecosystem, and verifiable credentials is a driver throughout which we establish a trust relationship, and also the credibility of each one of the players will be the one to turn that ecosystem in action. And by ecosystem, I mean there are a number of players who are part of that. And let me reinforce this perspective of working on an ecosystem. At Serasa, we have Serasa Pass as one of the possible platforms which aims to guarantee interoperability, and that is a useful digital identity system. We wanted to turn that vision a bit more local to our Brazilian market. So it's important to highlight ecosystem, credential issuers, and their reliability, the need of having mechanisms that will deliver those credentials. Wallets in the distribution channel, they are key. And at Serasa, we are strongly working on that. We have rendered the product, we are scaling that up. And as we are emphasizing ecosystems, we have to increase the number of emissions, not at the same platform, but at least to guarantee interoperability models that will guarantee such a relationship between each one of those issues, both the public and private sector. First, channels, the very beginning of the journey. How will that take place to end users or verifiers will make that authentication and validation service available? Second, Who is the issuer? What is the level of authentication which is generated by them to be able to render such a credential? Governance is another important element. They represent the ecosystem participants. Who is allowed to get into that ecosystem, which will operate the same ecosystem and a similar platform? How to guarantee such a governance model? And last but not least, which are the platforms and how may I take them to the market? Serasa Pass, if we believe on a model where we are going to give to platforms the added concept of interoperability, we have to work closer to the market. With the Bradesco Bank, there is an entity that we are developing for them, gov.br, which is also a possible tool even for ECA Digital. And we have a specific group from Serasa Pass to ECA Digital to help with parental control, and Serasa Pass goes towards that same line. In practical terms, if we are going to talk about reuse verifiable credentials, which is the jargon that we use to understand what are the credentials available in the market. If you have a Serasa app or if you don't have, download it. And a data wallet is available at our app where you may issue credentials, and even you may run a token of a card thanks to a number of credentials already available at our database that is available to any citizens who will authenticate themselves within our Serasa's database. That can be done as a plugin which will take me to an authentication setting, which may be Serasa's app, or maybe a web link where I will have to apply authentication concepts to guarantee the authenticity of that person throughout the biometrics to be able to make that person capable to access the system. Serasa app is an interesting channel. Of course, not the only one, but very important. Serasa has 100 million users and 40,000 recurrently monthly. That reinforces their trust aspect into the system. We have a lower tree, which is the maximum level of authentication, where we'll be able to guarantee 100% who that person is. Part of my slide is in English. AI has not translated that. We have wallet, we have three pillars: wallet, hub, data enrichment, and IDR payments. Wallet. We already have our own wallet, but we are working within the WhatsApp to be able to take those credentials to a number of journeys within WhatsApp, as WhatsApp is a very popular channel in Brazil. Hub of credentials. Self-declared credentials. If you have an issuer, and Serasa can be one of the issuers, but there are many others, and you end up being an issuer of credibility of that credential and authenticating that person who got such a credential. But we have to make capable the self-declaration concept. The self-declared credentials will validate the credentials. And the credentials that we have within Serasa Experience database, they are able even to read OCR documents and turn that capability into digital credentials. And not forget about the connection of the ecosystem with new issuers. Capabilities that is available. There is an e-commerce platform which turns capable online stores to access that system throughout a plugin at our Serasa Pass experience. Once you click, and you make an e-commerce transaction, they will not type any data. They will just, fill out the data information thanks to the credential that they had already authenticated beforehand, or maybe via a Pix once they start a business transaction. That is already ongoing in this country and at Serasa. We have another specific solution for Eco Digital. To the right, if you get into your Serasa's app and if you click on services, and if you go down on your feed and you choose Serasa's wallet, you are able today to issue credentials on your name, where you'll be able to manage and control your own credentials. In case of Awake, which allows me to do online transactions with 1 or 2 clicks max, rendering consent information of your personal data. And last, and my favorite one, which is a social capability, where verifiable credentials applied in practical terms, they allow the possibility of digitalization to all. There is an app called Odeti. That is an app for household services, men or women who may render kind of house service works. I mean, it's like a bridge between those who are offering their services and someone who'd like to hire a person to do some sort of job at their homes. That shows trust, because the person that is coming to your house, is going to your house, will be already qualified for that services, domestic services. In this example, both from service providers that may register themselves via their own authentications and they become a credential that can be used several other times, and also the contractor may also register themselves via the credentials. We have testimonials from a number of customers. There is a lady who is a service provider. She does some cleaning jobs and others at other people's house, and she testifies how easy it was to fulfill the registry. That's it from my side. Thank you. And to close, we'd like to invite Andressa to present the CPQD projects. I'd like to share a little bit of our experience within this scope of verifiable credentials, implementation, digital trust, and adoption in Brazil. We are a governmental agency towards private duties and sectors. We are celebrating 50 years of existence, and since 76, we are state partners where we develop technological competences, lab infrastructures, support to public policies, entrepreneurship of technological base. Our backgrounds with the decentralized technologies dates of around 10 years, where we have been acting in the decentralization with the blockchain, where we have carried out over 20 projects thanks to a multidisciplinary team with the PhD developers and researchers. And we also have a digital identity solution under production to the finance system. In addition to our involvement to the public sector, we also act at the private sector with a digital identity platform that is on the way. We have also a decentralized trust pilot with the Bradesco Bank and the blockchain Network Brazil. We also collaborate to national and international organizations. We are partner of Linux Foundation since 2018. We are BESO certified service provider since the first wave. And as I said, we are members of blockchain network as infrastructure providers, and also will help in coordinating a number of initiatives. Our the CPQD background in decentralized technologies, they happen thanks to our pioneerism in the sector of research, development, and application of decentralized digital identity. We have MGI as a partner where together we collaborate to identify the possible uses of IDD, and in addition, we are developing a framework of governance which is being validated by ISO in private and public scenarios, together with the Bradesco Bank and Blockchain Brazil Network. As we have been discussing for the past 2 days, those credentials, they become a trust framework to authenticate those credentials. We guarantee the integrity and the origin of information to know who has generated such an information, when and how. And credentials, they came as a way to transform data into reliable assets that can be reused and controlled by their users, changing a paradigm where users now are in the center of our activities and they have control of their own data. They can decide how, when, and with whom they would like to share their personal information. And that sets a new paradigm because now subjects and companies, they are managers of their own credentials as a sovereignty of regulating their own data. That adds benefits to the design of new projects which are previously verified with confidence in the documents. We mitigate the reuse of credentials, and the same credential can be used at different services. That improves customers' experiences. We reduce paper use, and also, we now work on a trust framework as we have a warranty about the source of the information in combination to biometrics. We may associate that information to the person that has that level of personal information. To a service layer, we have a whole stack to be followed. This service layer works over a digital public framework, DPI, interoperable, security, identities, payments, data sharing, trust registry, all of that supported by credentials, by decentralized identifiers, DIDs, and that trust registry layer, which addresses paper information, participants, each one's allowance to check the credentials in addition to the digital public infrastructure, allowing those interoperable ecosystems to talk one to another, where several organizations may be working at the same time to issue, verify, and reuse information in a safe manner, reducing costs, fraud, and access, and putting down some barriers to access.
In this context, the use of open standards is crucial to ensure interoperability. The use of international standards is mandatory to ensure scalability, interoperability, and avoid vendor lock-in. we should think of standards associated on how they prove themselves. So, what prevents the adoption of verifiable credentials so far? First is the network effect. We know that this is a very interesting solution with lots of benefits, but the more organizations are part of this ecosystem, the higher the use is going to be. But who is going to start? So the issuers wait for the verifiers and vice versa. Nobody takes the lead to start this movement. And another barrier is the need to have clear governance models that will determine who will be the issuers, who will be the standards to be used, how can establish trust, and who will be responsible or liable for fraud or errors. And it's crucial to reinforce governance systems to ensure the roles and also the levels of trust. And also integration with legacy systems because there are a lot of systems already at work. So we need to have that. But we know that organizations already have very complex integration when the purpose is clear. So it is a barrier, but not so much if there is willingness. And also, there are economic challenges. It's important to understand how good return on investment is because right now this is not very clear to stakeholders. Those gains have not been properly measured. However, we see that right now this is an important moment in time to start using that technology because if national players take too long to take the lead, international players will take this leading role and then they will use proprietary standards and that will bring vendor lock-in, impact on interoperability. And once the population becomes more familiar with that or with a given standard, moving to a different structure is difficult. And we also have some opportunities, potential opportunities. Relevant players can help disseminate multi-purpose verifiable credentials, and we can provide value offerings based on registries, on interaction with citizens when we are having to update your data or maybe updating your IRS statement. So today we have about 180 million national IDs, the taxpayer IDs that could be used as foundational um, identity data. Over 45 million taxpayers, and we could also generate income, employment, assets, identity, and revenue credentials. And also, we have over 95 million people who receive social benefits. And there we have features in terms of address, the type of house they live in, family composition, people with disabilities, specific groups, schooling level, employability, income. So there are several multi-purpose credentials that are very relevant. And in addition to that, thinking of the market, we have utilities. All of us have shown a copy of your electricity bill to prove that this is your actual address. So this could also be part of the verifiable credentials on credit bureaus for credit score, financial institutions that know their customers very much, very well. Also, uh, schools, teaching institutions, all these agents can take the lead in establishing those multi-purpose verifiable credentials. So, for the use of these credentials, we should also think about changes to processes and structure. You should encourage citizens to use that. There should be incentives to that so that that can be used in public service journeys, transforming processes as described here, potentially reducing fees that you might pay because it's going to be an automated journey, reduction of service time, and other optimizations that will generate value perception for processes and citizens, and orchestration of those services and credentials. So we can offer our citizens services based on the credentials they already have, and also offer credentials they don't have when they take a new service. And also, we need to make proper legal and regulatory changes, adaptation to the current ones. So here's one example. Article 13 of this law says that all public agents every year need to share their income statement that is stored in a given place. With the use of verifiable credentials, we could automate the validation of those credentials through and for the identification of outliers, some sort of diverging amounts between how much one person makes and how much they own. So we also have other sensitive information like donations, medical expenses, information that should not just circulate on the internet. Rust is going to be more distributed, interoperable, and user-centric. Verifiable credentials potentially can become a component of the next generation of digital services that is based on reliable data. Our timing is crucial to build those public digital infrastructure that should be led by institutions that have expertise on that. Technology is no longer the greatest barrier, but a good use of technology is crucial. An initial focus on use cases that are less complex but widely reaching, it's very crucial because it will increase the value perception. So finally, those credentials will be valuable when we have both the government market and citizens sharing the same trust base and taking these technical complexity and turn them into intuitive journeys and making those processes faster but reliable. Thank you very much. This was an excellent presentation. I'll just like to make a quick recap of what each one said. So first, we got a more institutional social perspective, showing not just the size of the opportunity, but also the transformative potential of these technology if well used. These are the words of Carlos Guedes. Then Professor Emerson shared us the perspective of INP, RNP, and how this can help not just in academic mobility, but also in the issuance of certificates. Marcelo Queiroz also brought the business model perspective in showing how much verifiable um, credentials can unlock more trust and also provide more control over data. And Andresa has also taken our attention to make use of the databases we already have, open pathway to other applications related to identity, multi-purpose. And finally, we have the basic governance and traceability aspects, and reminding us that verifiable credentials can only move forward if we clearly can issue, validate, revoke, and trust each type of credential. So those are complementary perspectives and shows that we are planning basically a revolution here. We need to orchestrate those efforts in engagement of people, process, regulation, infrastructure, so that these technology can benefit citizens. It's not the type of technology that you can develop in isolation. So there was the participation of Banco do Brasil and other institutional partners that made it very clear that those questions need to be answered while we plan this revolution with verifiable credentials. Citizens should also have it clear understand clearly what is going on, how are they data being used and where they're stored and everything. I don't know if we have more time for a final question from the audience. I would like to open to questions from the audience. I see that we have some questions in the room already. Feel free to answer that. Congratulations on these panels. Very interesting. I enjoyed hearing the context provided by all panelists, including the data of authenticated data, which is very important because we could get the data from everyone just out of a list, but that we could impersonate other people by simply doing that. It's important to have the authenticated, correct data, and verifiable credentials allow you to do that, saying that it's not just data that is valid. It's not just for the sake of having data. I would like to ask a question to Marcelo Queiroz. I like seeing a solution in a production environment. How do you see trust relationships, trust-based relationships, and the discussion about using blockchain or not? This is very controversial, but we see an accelerated erosion people have in institutions and in governments. And blockchain could provide this layer of trust. And you know that nobody's going to change the keys. We are not going to talk about blockchain without anybody here to talk about blockchain. Everybody's so passionate about blockchains. We have people saying passionate about for and against it, and it will take us this long discussion. So let's ask those questions in a dedicated forum, not going into that trap. But I agree with him. My answer is we're talking about verifiable credentials. So infrastructure is less important whether you use blockchain or not. The most important thing is what you mentioned. How can you validate data and turn this data into a credential? How can you give credibility and authenticity to it, regardless of whether I'm doing that through blockchain or any other infrastructure? So verifiable credentials on its own does not provide trust. It's just a mechanism in which you can transform this trust-based relationship. So you need to have a trustworthy issuer and using a standard so that it can be operated through a verifiable credential. So it has this ability of authentication, of generating trust in that data that is turned into a credential and that it can be portable. And this is infrastructure is less important. Yeah, it's the same question about keeping data in your smartphone or in the cloud. Yes, it's a passionate discussion. I know that. I work with blockchain, but I'm advocate for the no in this particular case. The workshop is about verifiable credentials, but we had one experience with ICP Brazil with PKI that shows that technology is not that important. The most important element is the user and how an user thinks. For years, we tried to issue certificates, but the successful idea is to forget about the certificates and just work with the documents. Did you wake up this morning just wanting to issue a verifiable credential? Right? Well, if you did, maybe you should see a shrink. You might think that, oh, I need a loan, I need a credit loan, or I need to send my data to my bank, or I need, there's something that you need to do. Well, yesterday, I needed to give the ATP of my GovBR to my accountant, and that a verifiable credential would have solved. Yeah, we learned that with the portal of digital signatures of GovBR. There is a certificate for digital signatures, everything. But what people want is to just upload the document, say that the document is signed and people trust that document. That's it. So whether they use blockchain or not, or whether credential is this or that, or the format is might be important to experts. We saw the debate of the legal team. They really don't care. They just want the results. So the future is about looking at the outcomes of this. So in Rio Grande do Sul, for example, people have access to rural credit with documents that are terrible, old, rotten. I am a technical guy, so in my opinion, it's important if it gives back to society. Well, it was a passionate discussion. I'd like to thank our guests for their participation, and let's keep this discussion in the future. Once again, we'd like to thank the panelists for their contribution and also to thank the moderator. Now I'd like to ask you to please stand for the official picture of this panel. Once again, thank you for your participation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the closing of the second Verifiable Credentials workshop. We would like to invite Mr. Xavier for his closing remarks. So this is the end of our workshop. We had a very wide coverage of topics. We talked about technical standards, concrete implementations in the public sector, in the academia, in the private sector. We talked about the organization of the ecosystem, talked about governance, social needs, and social impacts. I am very pleased with the outcome of this meeting, with the conversations I was able to have with people I've learned, with the lessons learned, and I hope that you enjoyed as well. Please bring us suggestions for improvement for this workshop. So here are some of the figures that reflect the success of this workshop. We had 44 speakers, experts from different areas, over 30 organizations represented from all sectors, academia, government, private sector, public sector, civil society, 18 from abroad, and we broadcast that in 3 different languages simultaneously. We had 105 people attending at its maximal point, 176 people who enrolled to be here on site. On YouTube, we had 300 people attending online, so over 400 people attended this workshop. This would have not been possible without the events and communications team of NIC.br, who I'd like to thank. Also, DataPrev, the technical staff of photography and the ceremonial team, Cell Web moderators, speakers, the World Bank, and MGI, represented by Claudia and Vinicius. And I hope to meet you in future events. Let's hope maybe the third workshop of verifiable credentials. And from September 1st through 3rd, there will be a global conference in Geneva talking about digital wallets and verifiable credentials. So if you're able to attend, it's a nice idea. I wish you safe travels, and I hope to see you in the future.